All right, the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. And I say to you, good morning, and thank you for being here. Charlie, I think it's a good morning. We'll know. I know you're a good guy and likable and an admired hero, and for some of the things that I say about the administration, I'm not talking about you directly. But you're a big guy, and I know you're going to handle it. I welcome all of you here to the hearing entitled the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Fiscal Year 2012 Budget Request. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biography, and truth and testimony disclosure for today's witness, Administrator Charles F. Bolton. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I want to thank Administrator Bolton for appearing before our committee today. There are a number of significant issues facing our nation's space program, and I look forward to a frank and open discussion on the issues. I'm concerned that the future of our space program is in very serious jeopardy and has been ever since the President ran a line through the word constellation. With the retirement of the space shuttle, NASA faces a critical period and needs to focus its limited resources to sustain our leadership in space. As everyone knows, we're in a challenging budget environment. In times like this, it's more important than ever for NASA to have credible, realistic plans that can be understood and can be defended. It must execute the programs it has with efficiency and thrift and work closely, I think, with the Congress to abide by congressional legislation. It's my personal opinion that someone over at the White House seems to have very little interest in working with the Congress. The President made a speech to the nation just last January. Told all of us that we had not only to work together, and that's a good speech, we should work together, that we even had to sit together that night. His speech was great. It was just 2 years too late. When his speech was shorter 2 years ago, I counted the words in the January speech, 5,602 words. 2 years ago, the words seemed to have narrowed down to 2 words, we won, with no real cooperation sought from the Republican side. In the area of human spaceflight, I'm concerned about having assured access to the International Space Station for the U.S. and our international partners so it can live up to its promise as a vital research laboratory. That's why Congress several years ago authorized a follow-on system called Constellation. The Constellation program was guided by the safety recommendations of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. Its goals and designs were well understood and endorsed by successive Republicans and Democratic congressmen working together. I'm sure you've heard that from many of us. And last year, the President, without warning, canceled Constellation in favor of a commercial crew proposal that assumed spending at least $6 billion over 5 years on the development and demonstration of up to 3 or 4 privately owned and operated commercial crew systems with no or very few details. Despite repeated requests from former Chairman Garden and myself, NASA has never provided the basis for its cost estimates or a credible plan showing how the needs of the U.S. and our international partners could be met at a lower cost or on a faster development cycle than Constellation. So last year, after intense and often contentious debate, Congress passed the NASA Authorization Act of 2010. The bill was a product of compromise, and no one got everything they wanted, but the act contained policy elements and funding guidelines that could allow the space program to move forward. Specifically, the act provided $10.8 billion over 3 years for the newly designed multipurpose crew vehicle and space launch system to assure the capability to supply and support the International Space Station for the United States and our international partners in case commercial proposals fail to materialize. The act also urged NASA to capitalize on investments already made in the Constellation program in order to save money, maintain a skilled workforce, and minimize further development delays. With regard to commercial crew, the act authorized $1.3 billion over 3 years for activities that, as the authorization bill states, quote, reduce risk, develop technologies, and lead to advancements that will help determine the most effective and efficient means of advancing the development of commercial crew services. Commercial crew was not ignored, but to be perfectly clear, it was not and is not Congress' first priority. Our first priority is to continue with the development of the Space Launch System and multipurpose crew vehicles. Yet the administration's FY 2012 budget proposed completely flips the priorities of the Act, significantly increasing the commercial crew funding while making deep cuts to the human exploration capability accounts, which Congress clearly intended to serve as our assured access to space. Members of this committee have been some of NASA's most ardent supporters in the House, and we make the NASA Authorization Act, all of us take it very seriously. We expect NASA to make good faith efforts to abide by the policy direction and funding limitations in the law, and to cease its efforts to delay resumption of full development of an assured access system. The new budget proposal disregards, yes, ignores our authorization law. Knowing that we face a very difficult budget environment for years to come, it's more important than ever that NASA have credible plans, execute them well, and work closely with Congress to abide by the legislative direction. We would like to work together with you to maintain our human spaceflight program. In order to do this, NASA should embrace the policy direction that has been agreed to, which would help reduce the surprise, frustration, and anger from those who have been your greatest supporters. I now recognize Mrs. Johnson for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back to the committee, Administrator Bolden. I want to congratulate you and your agency on the successful launch of the STS-133, and I understand that the mission has been very productive to date, and I look forward to the crew's safe return to the Earth next week. I had another appointment, so I missed it, and I kept telling the people who were going, I said I might not miss it because it might not go up that day, but it did. Today is the Congress's first opportunity to review the President's fiscal year 2012 budget request for NASA. This budget request is coming over in a very challenging budgetary environment with the appropriations for fiscal year 2011 still undecided, even though we are now 5 months into that year. I can only imagine the challenges that you are facing in trying to plan and carry out the challenging activities that the nation has asked you to undertake when the budgetary sands keep shifting. I hope that we're able to resolve our current appropriations impasse soon, but I also hope that an agreement doesn't come at the expense of critical investments this nation needs to make to prepare for the future. I consider NASA to be one of those critical investments. One only has to look at all the advances, new technologies, and inspiration that NASA has delivered over the years to realize that the people of NASA are one of our nation's vital resources, and we need to support them and their important missions in space and earth science, aeronautics, and human space flight and exploration. I could spend my entire time listing just some of the fruits of our past investments in NASA, but have become embedded in our daily lives, whether they be as broad a scope as global satellite communication or as specific as smoke detectors, cordless power tools, digital mammography, body imaging, and firefighter breathing systems. Other nations increasingly are recognizing the benefits of strong and active space program can deliver. And as a result, we see them being willing to make the necessary investments to build their space capabilities. However, I'm worried that we here in America are forgetting how important these R&D investments are to our future and how critical this skilled workforce is to our future competitiveness. I'm a great admirer of you, Mr. Bolden, and the inspirational leadership that you bring to NASA. I'm also a supporter of the President, who wishes you to be successful in these policy initiatives. However, I have to say that I'm disappointed in the budget request that is before us today, especially in light of all the work that Congress undertook last year to forge a constructive path forward for the nation's space program. While last year's Authorization Act was by no means a perfect bill, it did clearly articulate Congress's intent that NASA pursue a meaningful human space flight and exploration program that builds on all the work that has been done over the past 5 years. I had thought that the administration agreed with the compromise that was enacted into law, but I'm afraid that I do not see it reflected in the proposed NASA budget request. The request cuts NASA's overall budget plan and its human exploration budget even further than before, delays the development of the next generation vehicles, and eliminates any concrete destinations or milestones beyond the International Space Station. This is an unfortunate situation for a number of reasons, but its most damaging impact will be on both our existing highly skilled workforce and on the young people who are inspired by NASA to dream of careers in science and technology. The start-stop approach to funding goals that we have seen over the past several years can only cause us to lose the best and brightest of both groups, and they will never be replaced. It will not be easy. We are really not getting them ready, so we cannot afford to lose the ones that we have. I know that you have great sympathy for the budget and the pressures that NASA is facing, as we do. That is why I am hoping and expecting that the administration would provide some constancy of funding and direction to the agency, and I'm afraid that I don't see it in the budget that has been submitted to Congress. So where do we go from here? I think that the most constructive approach for all of us here is to consider the budget request that you will present today as the beginning of a discussion, not the end. We're going to need you to tell us what you can do with your budget, not what you can't do. We need to know about the space flight goals that have been set forth in successive NASA authorization acts. We want to know what is possible. We need to know not just what you cannot do. Make no mistake about it, this is a critical period for NASA. Our leadership and preeminence in space and aeronautics is at stake. Resting on our laurels from prior accomplishments is not an option. Sustained investments in research, technology, and development must be made, not just for our sake, but for our nation's sake. Without this sustained investment in the years ahead, NASA will be hard-pressed to foster innovation needed to inspire young generations to pursue scientific and technical careers, and that would be a bad sign for our nation. I want to work with you, Administrator Bolden, and with Chairman Hall to ensure that NASA continues to instill pride and to inspire by pushing back the frontiers of knowledge through exploring and living in space, advancing science and engineering, and developing innovative technologies. I want to again welcome you for coming, and I hope that we can work together to see that we have a more positive NASA program. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for a great opening statement. And if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I'd like to, and I'm proud to introduce the witness. Charles F. Bolden, Jr. was appointed NASA Administrator by President Obama and was sworn in on July 17, 2009. He's an astronaut, having flown on 4 shuttle missions, including the mission that deployed the Hubble Space Telescope. Prior to being appointed administrator, Mr. Bolden served in the United States Marine Corps for 34 years. During his service, he was an aviator, having flown 100 missions in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. He was a test pilot. He held a number of commands. Mr. Bolden retired from the Corps with the rank of Major General. He's a true patriot. We're very proud to have him here today. He's also a friend of mine, admired by many. I observed him just several weeks ago as he nurtured the care of those that had lost others in carrying out the space program out at the cemetery here. I was with him last Thursday as he welcomed everybody for a great day and a day of pride that we launched successfully. And he's a true patriot, and we're very glad to have him before us today. Recognize you, sir, for 5 minutes, but we'll be more lenient with you since I've had to read all these things to you here. If you need more time, you take it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Chairman Hall and Ranking Member Johnson, members of this committee, thank you very much. And Chairman and Ranking Member, let me congratulate both of you on your new leadership roles. I want to thank you and all the members of the committee for the longstanding support that all of you have given to NASA. We have a common passion for space exploration and the benefits it brings our nation. As you take on your new responsibilities, I look forward to continuing our work together in the same collegial fashion as we have in the past. And I would like to take the liberty of also thanking you, Chairman Hall, for getting space back into the name of this committee. That it was missing for many years, and it is now back in the name, so I do appreciate that. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to show a very short video clip that we brought with us, if that's okay.
And who would object?
Commander of the International Space Station, along with my crewmates, NASA astronaut Katie Coleman and European Space Agency astronaut Paolo Nispoli. Our Russian crewmates are working on other activities today during this busy time for us. We're honored to be a part of today's hearing before the U.S. House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I would like to personally thank the members of this committee and the entire Congress for their thoughts and prayers these past weeks as my sister-in-law continues her remarkable recovery. My brother Mark and I know how much Gabby appreciates the love and support she's received from each and every one of you. All of us know how deeply she believes in the work of this committee, and we know how badly she would want to be with you today. Again, thank you for your continued prayers for Gabby and her miraculous recovery and your support for our nation's efforts in space.
Thank you for the time to show that video, Mr. Chairman. Not a day goes by that I don't think and pray about Gabby. All of us in the NASA family continue to pray for her speedy and full recovery. The International Space Station is our anchor for future exploration, and our crew members aboard ISS are truly serving on the frontiers of human experience. We're delighted that with the authorization bill passed and signed into law last fall, Station will continue as a global resource for another 10 years. It's my privilege today to discuss the President's fiscal 2012 budget request of $18.7 billion for NASA. Despite the President's commitment to fiscal restraint, I am pleased that we are proposing to hold funding at the level appropriated in 2010, which of course continues to be our spending level under the continuing resolution. This budget request continues the agency's focus on a reinvigorated path of innovation and technological discovery, leading to an array of challenging destinations and missions that engage the public. The Authorization Act of 2010 gave NASA a clear direction. We're moving forward to implement the details of that act with this fiscal year 2012 budget. The President's budget for NASA funds all major elements of the act while supporting a diverse portfolio of key programs. Because these are tough fiscal times, we also had to make some difficult choices. Reductions were necessary in some areas so we can invest in the future while living within our means. This budget maintains a strong commitment to human spaceflight and the development of new technologies. It invests in the excellent science, aeronautics research, and education programs that will help us win the future. It carries out programs of innovation to support long-term job growth and a dynamic economy that will help us out-innovate, out-educate, and outbuild all others in the world. Along with our budget proposal, last week we published our 2011 strategic plan. NASA's core mission in support of this vision that's on the chart remains fundamentally the same as it has since its inception in 1958. Just this past week, we launched STS-133 on the Shuttle Discovery, one of the final 3 shuttle flights to the ISS, along with supplies that will support the station's scientific research and technology demonstrations. Discovery is also, or has also, delivered a robotic crew member, Robonaut 2, R2. The Glory Earth Science Mission will launch from California this week on a mission to help us better understand Earth and its atmosphere and the variables affecting our climate. Our space program continues to venture in ways that will have long-term benefits, and there are many more milestones in the very near term. Yesterday, we announced 3 new program offices to carry out our future work. NASA brings good jobs and bolsters the economy and communities across this nation. This chart shows at a very high level the scope of our activities for fiscal year 2012. Our priorities in human spaceflight in the fiscal year 2012 budget request are to maintain safe access for American astronauts to low Earth orbit as we fully utilize the International Space Station, facilitate safe, reliable, and cost-effective U.S.-provided commercial access to low Earth orbit for American astronauts and their supplies as soon as possible, begin to lay the groundwork for expanding human presence into deep space, the Moon, asteroids, and eventually Mars through development of a powerful, evolvable heavy-lift rocket and multi-purpose capsule, and pursue technology development to carry humans farther into the solar system. These initiatives will enable America to retain its position as a leader in space exploration for generations to come. At the same time, in our other endeavors, our priorities are to extend our reach with robots and scientific observatories, to learn more about our home planet and the solar system and peer beyond it to the origins of the universe. Pursue groundbreaking research into the next generation of aviation technologies and carry out dynamic education programs that help develop the next generation of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professionals. That's a lot, but NASA thrives on doing big things. We have vastly increased human knowledge, and our discoveries and technologies have improved life on Earth. There has been some concern that NASA is abandoning human spaceflight. This simply is not true. These charts illustrate the percentage of NASA's budget that supports human spaceflight. As you can see, it's a substantial portion, 44% in this chart. If I remove the cost of facilities and other support, it's 57% of our budget. Here's human spaceflight broken out with its slice of the pie alone. We devote some resources in closing out the shuttle program. As the centerpiece of human spaceflight and the critical anchor for our future deep space exploration, the International Space Station gets the largest portion of funds. The next generation of vehicles, the evolvable heavy-lift rocket and the multi-purpose crew vehicle, receive 39% of our human spaceflight budget. Our continuing efforts to facilitate commercial access to space receive a significant boost, but still represent almost the smallest piece of our human spaceflight pie. I want to commend the NASA workforce, both civil servants and contractors across the nation, for their dedication to our missions during this time of transition and change. These workers are our greatest assets, and they make us all proud. They fully understand the risks of our exploration and welcome the challenge. They will be the ones making tomorrow happen. These are exciting and dynamic times at NASA. The challenges ahead are significant, but the opportunities are great. We have to achieve big things that will create a measurable impact on our economy, our world, and our way of life. I thank you for the time to make my statement, and I look forward to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. I think most of you know that our committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Boland, as I said in my opening remarks, I want us to have the safest possible assured access to the space station that meets the goals of the U.S. and our international partners, and I know you want that same thing. Trying to stimulate commercial competition is a worthy goal that I support, but not at the expense of ensuring the safest, most robust system for our astronauts. Norrin Augustine's committee report said, while there may be potential benefits, of commercial services that transport crew to the low Earth orbit. There's simply too many risks at the present time not to have a viable fallback option for risk mitigation. Congress has taken these concerns to heart and expressed them in the policy and funding direction in the NASA Authorization Act and in subsequent appropriations measures, including the FY 2011 continuing resolution. Yet, NASA's FY 2012 budget request once again seeks to reverse congressional priorities by proposing increased funding for commercial crew activities and significant reductions in the multipurpose crew vehicle and space launch system that builds on the experience, the workforce of the shuttle, the workforce of Republicans and Democrats alike, and the Constellation programs to assure that we have the capabilities to do the things in space that are strategically important for the United States. Mr. Bolden, frankly, we're exasperated that NASA is not listening to our message. And I guess, and maybe you are listening to our message, and maybe your advice falls on non-receptive ears. I don't know what the problem is, but I think for this committee here, we would appreciate if you could just justify why NASA is proposing the reductions to the human exploration capabilities budget that's clearly our priority.
Mr. Chairman, I get your message loud and clear, and so does the President. And as I mentioned, I think the budget does in fact reflect following your guidance. As I mentioned, these are very difficult times. Things have changed significantly since last year when we all thought that we were on a certain path. I took a look at the priorities that were established for us in human spaceflight, and I will tell you, I remember back, it was probably 2004. You will remember better than I, but I came with John Blaha, former astronaut. The two of us came up to brief you on potential future human spacecraft when we were trying to decide how we were going to execute the vision for space exploration. And John Blaha got down on his knees at your desk and took a pad of paper and started drawing abort guidelines and descriptions of why a certain spacecraft could not work or would not work. And you made the statement to us that, you know, I understand all that, but you need to understand something else, and you need to take this message back to the NASA administrator. We will not lose another crew in spaceflight. And if we do, somebody will have hell to pay. Those words have stuck with me. And I do not intend to have to pay any debt on losing a crew. So safety of our crews is always my #1 priority. When I looked at how we get them safely to the International Space Station on American-made rockets, the best way to do that, and we can discuss this in the coming months, but the best, most efficient, perhaps fastest way to do that is by relying on the commercial entities that are well along in their development programs to provide access to low Earth orbit while NASA engages exploration, uses the evolvable heavy lift vehicle and a crew exploration vehicle to go do exploration beyond low Earth orbit. So I think we are complying with the major elements of the Authorization Act, and we made the adjustments in the balance inside that act that now causes the consternation because we wanted to make sure that I put #1 priority, safety of the crew. The heavy lift launch vehicle and the multipurpose crew vehicle, while they are exploration vehicles, and everybody needs to understand that, they are not being built to double as low Earth orbit vehicles. That's inefficient. I think anybody around here knows that when you try to build one system to do everything, you end up with nothing. So we are going to build an exploration system, heavy lift launch vehicle, and multipurpose crew vehicle. Anything that can go beyond low Earth orbit can go to low Earth orbit. It's just very inefficient and a big waste of money. But the exploration systems will have the capability of providing backup should any commercial entity fail. And failure is not meant they fail to produce. They will produce because the commercial entities have produced for years. Orbital, that's one of our competitors right now in both the COTS program and the CRS program, and has announced that they intend to compete in commercial crew. Orbital has a record of success since the 1980s, 1990s. They've launched 155 successful space launches. Many of my satellites that are on orbit today were put there by Orbital Sciences, so they can produce. anyone who would try to convince you that they cannot, that American industry cannot produce, is just not being factual, and they're not being truthful, and they're being disingenuous. So we have made the decision that safety of the crew is #1 priority. The quickest, most efficient, safest way for me to get them there is through relying on commercial entities to handle access to low Earth orbit, and then my focus on safety for crews that are going beyond low Earth orbit.
I don't know how much more time I have, but 30 years ago, or over 30 years ago, when I first came up here, I was lucky enough, or fortunate enough to be on this committee. And I took trips to the areas that launched our people, you and many other brave men and women that made the program such an American program, something we're so proud of. And I had hoped at that time that someday commercial people could, that the private sector could launch these things and take it away from government. But knowing that it took the tax basis, the background of all the people of the United States to make it go, I realized that was going to be a long time coming. And I think you have the opinion that it's basically here, or that we're hoping that we can reach that. And I hope we can all get together. You and I differ on this, and some of us differ on it. Some of our members here are good and valuable members, agree with you 100%. So you have support on this committee, and you have my support, but I want to get together with the people that can make it go and be sure they can make it go. And I don't want to close the bidding to anybody in the world, but I want them to do more than just sign a contract. I want them to show, as you say, that they can do that they're contracting to do, and not go halfway and look back over their shoulder and say, so sorry.
Yes, sir.
That's what we have to guard against. And I thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At this time, I recognize Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you very much. I'm not really sure where to begin. You have indicated that NASA has planned the last shuttle mission, STS-135, if funds are available. Recognizing that the appropriations for 2011 have not been even finalized, what priority does STS-135 have relative to the priorities of NASA otherwise?
Congresswoman, STS-135 is on my schedule, and I intend to fly STS-135 in June. I have a launch date. I think it's June 28th, and unless this Congress does something that changes the fiscal status of present conditions, and you can do that. I mean, if you take drastic action and significantly reduce the amount of money that I get whenever we get a 2011 budget, then it could change things. But right now, I anticipate that that reasonable people can disagree, and that the Congress is going to come to agreements that will not cripple NASA and the rest of the nation, and we will fly STS-135.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
This time recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bolton, less than a year ago, the President gave a speech and said that he actually wanted to increase NASA's budget by, I think, $6 billion. The White House budget is now, I think, $2.5 billion less than NASA's flatline budget. You imply in your testimony that there are going to be sufficient resources for the heavy lift rocket, for the crew vehicle, and for landing systems for missions to the, I guess, Mars, Moon, and the asteroids. It seems to me that vision without resources is a fantasy, and that it's not really credible to say you can complete all those missions with the resources that have been designated. And just wondered if you would respond to that. There are a lot of professionals, a lot of NASA professionals that just say it can't be done, and you and the administration are saying it can be done.
So you're the only one that I've heard in the last few weeks that I'm saying anything can be done. Everybody else tells me I'm saying it can't, and I do believe it can.
So you stand by your budget and think you can accomplish all that with the resources that you have designated?
Sir, I do.
Okay. Would you please give me a timetable and a cost for the missions, not to Mars. That's just, I think, off the books and too expensive. But give me a cost and a timetable for the missions to back to the moon and to the asteroids.
Congressman, I am unable to give you a timetable at this particular time because we need to find out. We need to find out, first of all, what my 2011 budget is going to be. I am spending right now at the 2010 spending level, hoping that that doesn't get dramatically reduced below that. If it does, all bets are off. Because as we get close, I think I don't intend to be preaching to the choir here, but I just want to remind everybody, the closer we get to the end of the fiscal year, if I get a drastic reduction in my budget, it all hits at one time and all bets are off. We've got to go back to the drawing board. I don't anticipate that that's going to happen. It is my hope that we will be able to continue spending at the 2011 level, 2010 level, or higher, and then I think we will be able, we are planning to bring to the Congress in the summer a plan for a multipurpose crew vehicle, an evolvable heavy lift system that will enable us to meet targets set by the Congress and the President. And those targets to date are an asteroid in the time frame of 2025 or so, and a mission to or around the moon with a follow-on landing sometime in the 2030s. So those dates I still stand by. The other date that you gave me in the Authorization Act, 2016, for a heavy lift launch vehicle and a multi-purpose crew module, those were difficult meeting even under the proposed 2011 budget and the amounts, the level of the Authorization Act. And that was what I said in my 90-day report, that I did not say we could not do it. What I said was, given the level of funding in the 2010 Authorization Act, you have now made it very difficult for me to be able to execute the development of a heavy lift launch system and a multi-purpose crew vehicle that is flying in 2016. I have not said I cannot do that, but I don't want to mislead anyone and make them think that I'm saying we can do it. There are a lot of a lot of industry representatives sitting behind me here who will tell you that we, together as a team, are going to be challenged no matter how much money you give us. You know, but we will make our effort to do what it is that the Congress and the President agree.
Mr. Bolton, let me squeeze in one more question, and that is, I was glad to see, I think it's an 8% increase in the astrophysics program. A lot of that is going to be directed to the search for Earth-like planets. What is the latest development in that area, and what do you expect us to learn in the next couple of years?
Congressman, you sound like someone who's interested, so I will tell you the results from WISE and results to date from the Kepler Observatory have been next to phenomenal. We have identified, and I can't hold it in my brain, the numbers, but we have, just in the last year, we have identified literally hundreds, if not thousands.
What about the future, the next couple of years?
We are going to fly additional missions that will just build upon that knowledge. Kepler is not done. WISE is shut out, but we are looking at a follow-on to WISE. You know, I would love to fly something that goes around Venus and looks back at Earth, because I'm not an astrophysicist or any of that stuff, but my science experts tell me that if we can put something like a WISE satellite in a Venus orbit looking back at Earth, when it comes to near-Earth objects, for example, things that will threaten this planet, we will have a much better look at them, a much better ability to make early determinations on their trajectory. And I know this is hokey stuff to some people, and they will want to laugh me off the planet, but potentially will save the planet one of these days.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. At this time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Congressman Wu. All right, and that the gentle lady from Maryland, Ms. Edwards. I recognize Ms. Edwards, and I'm proud to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I just have a question that goes to the consistencies between the authorization and your budget. And I think there are a number of areas where what I'm trying to read is whether the authorization that we've only just recently approved kind of matches your budget priorities. And so I'd appreciate your speaking to that. And then further going to the details of the earth sciences. And my concern that I think where we tried to step up our investment in earth sciences, it seems that some of that's being sacrificed in this budget. And so I'd like you to address that and address, if you will, the continuing resolution as we've known it, and I think we will see some evolution of that over the next couple of weeks, and what the budget impact of the CR would be on the earth sciences component, stretching out some of these programs. And in some cases, I guess I wonder whether, once you begin to stretch out or cancel these programs, the investment that we've already made in them might cancel out any potential savings from canceling them. So I'm a little unclear about that. And if you could give us some insight into those areas of the budget proposal, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Congresswoman, let me go back to October of last year. Some of you will remember I was making phone calls to you as debate was going on the floor of the House about the Authorization Act. I was criticized for being out of the country, but nonetheless, I don't think any of you knew that I was, because I was on the phone to you all night when we debated the level of authorization or even the passage of the authorization bill. At that time, we had not had an election. The fiscal environment in the nation was a lot different than it was 1 month later when the President finally signed the Bipartisan Authorization Act. So things really changed between the time that this Congress labored to develop the 2010 Authorization Act and the time that the President signed it, and now. We always face the budgetary problems that we do today, but none of us had taken the time to sit down and say, okay, we are really going to deal with it. So the 2012 budget it made our first effort to say we are really going to deal with the fiscal reality, and so we took a cut. We made some very difficult choices in all of our programs. The earth science programs to which you question, many of them went back to the dates of launch that were planned when I became the NASA administrator. If you remember when we proposed the President's proposed 2011 budget, we were really happy because we had a significant amount of plus up for earth science. We were going to pull programs like Destiny and Clario forward by as much as 2 years. We had earth science missions that were going to be flown that we didn't even know we could put on the books. Today, things have really changed, and so in the case of those two, as examples, Clario and Destiny, they're now back to the original dates when I became the administrator, which is about 2018.
But, Mr. Administrator, let me just ask you, so if you add together the investments that have already been made in Destiny and GPM, in the Joint Dark Energy Mission, in Clario, add all of those things together, are we really getting savings by canceling or stretching these out?
We have no choice but to stretch out Destiny and Clario because we don't have the money available that we were going to use to bring them forward. And it's really not, it appears that we're stretching them out. We're taking them back to the original launch dates. Those two. JDAM is no longer on NASA's books. We are looking for other dark energy missions to replace that. The one that I think came out of the Astrophysics Decadal Survey was WFIRST, which is a major mission of significant cost that we may or may not be able to bring into this decade, so it may have to wait. But I don't see any reason to take any of our earth science missions off the table right now. I am doing everything I can to preserve those missions.
Well, you can just answer this for the record when you can, but I really would appreciate a response from the administration on the effect that these kind of program cuts have on experiments that provide satellite reporting that help us in the present, understanding and tracking tropical storms in Florida and the Gulf Coast, monitoring wildfires in California, tornado formations in the middle of the country. I mean, these have actually present-day impact when you look at the kinds of cuts that are being proposed. And So if you're telling me that maybe it is we're not going to have any storms, maybe we're not going to have any wildfires or tornadoes, that would be really cool. You'd be quite a projectionist. But the reality is we won't have the tools to look at these things in the way that we need to, that cost human lives, cost property and damage, and impact our commerce. And with that, I'd close.
Congresswoman, I will take that for the record, and I would say I thank you for your observation. We are in dire straits as a nation when it comes to weather and climate prediction. INPOS is a satellite system jointly done by NOAA, NASA, and the Department of Defense, which is no longer there. We have had to break it up because of problems that we had, and we really do need to take a focused look at our earth science programs so that we make sure that we don't allow gaps to occur in the coverage for things like weather. You know, I need to get people thinking about earth science as the study of our planet, its atmosphere, its oceans, and the topography, the land, so that we don't do dumb things like think we can do away with an earth science satellite because it's talking about global warming. That is not what I do. I don't do global warming. I do earth science, and so we should talk more about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't do global warming either.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
But we're sure on the same side there. Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Now I recognize one of the real veterans of this committee, Mr. Rohrbacher, the gentleman from California.
Did somebody say global warming? I want to thank you, General, for mentioning near-Earth objects. And again, too many people take this issue so lightly, and it would surprise no one if tomorrow there was a discovery made that an object was heading toward the Earth that could cause tremendous loss of life, and we would be caught flat-footed. So those of us who are willing to take the laughs and et cetera, and the scoffing are playing a very important role in protecting a large number of people on this planet. I understand in your budget you are taking care of a certain usage of the Arecibo telescope that will ensure that that important part of identifying objects that could threaten the Earth stays in play. Let me note about NIMPOS. Had that project, the NIMPOS project, been on time and on budget, we wouldn't be worrying about anything right now, would we? We'd have all the money we want. If we just would have run that one project, all of the money for heavy lift, all of that would have been available because it's all been wasted. Your most important job, General, is to make sure that never happens again and that we never waste billions of dollars by having programs managed so inefficiently as that program was managed. I would like to place in the record, Mr. Chairman, a letter for the record of 50 leaders. It's a letter signed by 50 leaders from the space community, including former NASA executives and former astronauts and one former chairman of this very committee, talking basically, well, I'd like to submit this letter for the record at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Okay. These credentialed experts are urging that NASA fully fund the use of commercial companies to carry crew to the space station because it is that in and of itself is a strategy that is critical for the nation's success in our space efforts. And furthermore, they point out that funding of NASA's commercial crew program would lower the cost of low Earth orbit, thus enabling more of NASA's budget to be applied to its focus on exploration beyond low Earth orbit and better enabling the kind of program laid out in the NASA authorization bill. Let me note that it makes no more sense today to have government employees being the ones who manage and operate and build all the space transportation vehicles than it would be if we said 20 years ago or 30 years ago, no, I'm sorry that all of the jet airplanes, all of our jet airliners have to be built and operated by a government-run airline. And no, we have reached a technological stage when indeed the private sector can play a major role in reducing the costs of what it takes for government employees and government programs to operate. So I, number one, am one person I know that at least on this committee, that sides with you and the administration on at least trying to make sure that we maximize the benefit that the private sector can provide, perhaps in partnership with NASA, because that's what it's about. And Minister Bolden, the 2010 NASA authorization painted a stark line between low Earth orbit operations for which it demanded a commercial process, and the exploration applications for which it relied on for the standard NASA development process. Does this budget, does your budget request support this structure of having that line between those two points, two approaches?
Congressman, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but
Okay.
but I would like to say I have been unfortunately remiss in effectively articulating the connection among all the NASA programs. You know, we are trying to get rid of stovepipes because we're trying to stay within the budget, fulfill our obligation to live within the elements of the 2010 Authorization Act, and then when it comes to human spaceflight, keeping our crews safe. The International Space Station, as I mentioned earlier, is the anchor for all future exploration. That's our moon right now. What is going on the International Space Station with a full 6-person crew, and today an additional 6+1 in Robonaut, in R2, that we are developing technologies, we are understanding science that we will need to send humans beyond low Earth orbit. So it is the anchor.
Well, we also have a lot of investment in this. It's the answer,
Yes, sir.
but we're talking about an investment of money. How much money will be saved, for example, if we would rely on this private commercial transportation of crew to the space station back, as compared to if we simply kept the space shuttle going for another 10 years?
Congressman, I wish I could answer that question, but that would be pure conjecture because we haven't flown a single commercial crew flight yet, and I don't want to try to blow smoke. I don't know.
Well, let me conjecture, and
Yes, sir.
I would conjecture that we're talking about saving billions and billions of dollars as compared to keeping the shuttles going or developing other kind of craft only by a NASA program, because at least these companies will be investing hundreds of millions of dollars of their own money. Now, how much money have private companies, and which private companies have invested their money? That is money, it's not coming from our budget.
Yes, sir.
We're actually having people come in from the outside, releasing further money from NASA to do other things. How much money are we expecting from the private sector?
Sir, I will take that for the record, but I can tell you, I do know it is substantially more than we have paid in our fixed cost for the COTS program, and we will pay in our fixed costs for the cargo resupply mission. So the private entities have already invested substantially more than we have. I will take it for the record because I think your staffs were briefed earlier this week on some dollar figures, and they tried to give me that, and I couldn't remember it, so I said I would take it for the record.
Thank you very much, General.
Thank you.
This time recognize Mr. Clark, the gentleman from Michigan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hall, Ranking Member Johnson. Administrator Bolden, thank you for being here. I've got a series of questions, and all of them relate to the impact of the proposed CR and the President's budget on NASA's ability to produce technology that can create jobs. And, you know, I don't have any space centers or rocket manufacturers in the district that I represent. I'm from Detroit, and I represent Metro Detroit. We do make cars. And back 40 years ago, NASA released some structural analysis program technology that auto manufacturers were ultimately able to use to make better front ends, design better front ends and steering linkages. Most recently, your research in advanced fuels and fuel technology, I believe, has a lot of potential to help us make better plug-in hybrid vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles. Essentially, it's this, is that NASA technology has meant better automotive technology, which means that Detroit's able to sell better cars, and that creates more jobs for the people that I represent. What, if any, is the impact of the proposed CR and the President's budget on these types of initiatives that can be commercialized to create good jobs in our country?
Congressman, I don't want to speculate on what the impact of a potential CR would be, but in the President's budget, it will allow us to continue the technology and technological innovation that has always been the hallmark of this administration. And I would, if I may, I would suggest that you go back home and brag about Detroit's part in STS-133. Detroit is aboard STS-133 in the person, if you will, of R2, Robonaut. Robonaut is a product of a 3-year Space Act agreement between General Motors and NASA. It was done on our nickel and General Motors' nickel. It was not in anyone's budget, but it was exploration technology that came back from the old Constellation program. General Motors came to us and said, we're having to pay hospital cost, injury cost on our workers who are putting the rain panel into cars because they're having to exert so much pressure to put that panel in place. Can you help us? And together we started developing R2. R2 now, I don't know whether it's in operation yet on the GM line, production line, but the intent is that R2 will take the place of humans in doing some of this high-level maintenance, reducing injuries. And General Motors continues their work in the SAA on the International Space Station now because R2 will be unfurled in the springtime, and then we'll begin to do a series of evolutions that are both General Motors projects as well as NASA projects. So you and the people of Detroit are on board the International Space Station.
Well, thank you. That gives me even more of the reason to support your agency and serve on this committee. A couple questions I have to deal with the refocus of your agency on commercial development and also the impact of the proposed cuts on NASA education programs. But just for a backdrop, the President recently said that our economic crisis was like was this generation's Sputnik moment. And decades ago, when Soviet Union launched Sputnik, that created huge public and political support for massive R&D investment that ended up creating a lot of economic development and spurred investment in education. You had a lot of people who went into math, science, and technology fields. Some of the investments, as Ranking Member Johnson noted, in NASA resulted in technology that was applied to manufacture calculators, the microchip, and other technologies that we use in everyday life. How does your agency's reorientation, especially your focus on commercial development, really square with that long-term commitment to overall economic activity for our country?
Yes. Congressman, the President has said the nation that out-educates wins. You will probably know that education is a passion of mine, and we have put serious investment into education through programs like the Summer of Innovation that we piloted last year and will continue the next 2 summers. We are trying with we now have an Office of Chief Technologist. His focus is on working with academia, industry, and just general researchers and trying to find innovative ways to bring value to our own economy, to grow our economy, if you will. And those things are still covered in the President's 2012 budget. Not to the extent that they were in the President's proposed 2011 budget, but still, I think, effectively covered. We've got to demonstrate that we can do what we say we can do. So while I would love to have more money for technology demonstrations, NASA has a history of promising a lot in technology demonstrations and then squandering the money. We do not intend to do that. We intend to work with centers like the Glenn Research Center, the Langley Research Center, Ames Research Center, and others and actually bring some of this technology development to the fore where industry, academia are participating. If you go out to Colorado, where one of our competitors in the Commercial Crew Development Program is building their rocket, they bring college students in, and they work alongside engineers. That's not NASA, but that is a commercial entity that is supporting NASA and the future of commercial spaceflight, but they're bringing college students in to get them excited about being a part of this program.
You know, in my brief 8 weeks as chairman of this committee, I have my first real problem. You know, we recognize those who I'm to call upon to speak for 5 minutes by the time they get here. There are two who got here at identically the same time, Mr. Ridgel and Miss Adams. Not only that, they sat down at exactly the same time. And knowing Mr. Ridgel is a gentleman, Miss Adams is a very lovely lady, I'm going to recognize Miss Adams for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 minutes, whatever she wants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bolton, I want to commend you for your statement. The safety of our crew members is our priority. And I don't think you'll see anybody in this committee that disagrees with that statement. I'm going to go back to the authorization bill and the budget request. NASA told Congress in January there was no way it could meet the 2015 flight schedule deadline. I'm going to put my glasses on. For multi-purpose crew vehicle and space launch systems, citing, among other things, financial constraints. Based upon the request for $1.2 billion less for these systems than was what was authorized by Congress, I am concerned that you're really not interested in meeting this deadline at all. Coupled with, in an interview recently with your chief technologist, Mr. Robert Braun, he was quoted as saying that a new vehicle for NASA space flight is, and I quote, let's call it, think about it as a decade if you want to put a timestamp on it. Is this your time? I mean, is this your timetable? This is something I want to know. Is this what you believe Congress has authorized? And then the NASA authorization bill stated that the Space Launch System and the multi-purpose crew vehicle should act as a backup in case the commercial crew is not ready in time. And again, is this something you're pursuing? And I want to state that when you were earlier speaking, you said that this would not be a productive use of the cost and time and ability of NASA, or something similar to that. And it struck me as interesting that you said that we would not use this as a capability of this vehicle.
Yes, ma'am. We would not want to use an exploration vehicle as a low Earth orbiting vehicle because it would indicate two things that happen. One, we had either had the loss, the physical loss of a low Earth orbiting vehicle, whether it's Soyuz currently, or whether it was an orbital or a Boeing or a SpaceX or any other vehicle. It would mean that we had lost a vehicle and crew. And that would be why we would have to rely on a government backup. I don't ever want to get to that day that I have failed in my effort to keep my astronauts safe if we have to rely on Orion or a multi-purpose crew vehicle.
Shouldn't we have a backup vehicle?
We should always have a backup vehicle. Okay. We don't have one right now once I land shuttle in June. And the multi-purpose crew vehicle on a heavy lift vehicle will serve as a backup to any system. I ideally would like to have 2 commercially...
And the timetable?
The timetable for this? The timetable for commercially available crew access is the 2015-2016 timeframe. You know, and there are a lot of people who, that is dependent. If you ask industry, I have been told by them that 3 years from the day they sign a contract, they will be able to fly commercially crew to orbit. So, you know, the sooner I can get them through the early stages where we are now, the sooner we can sign a contract and make it possible for them to fly.
Since I only have 5 minutes, I want to get as many questions in as possible because I have a lot of questions. On page 1 of your testimony, you state the request supports an aggressive launch rate over the next 2 years with about 40 U.S. and international missions to the ISS for science and to support other agencies. Can you please tell the committee how many of those flights are NASA flights?
Those are all NASA-related flights.
NASA flights.
I will get back to you on that, ma'am.
Page 2, you outline the 2012 budget priorities for human spaceflight. Can you please tell the committee where those priorities were developed, from the most recent authorization bill or from other sources or other methods?
The priority for human spaceflight has been on the record for a number of years as we develop the International Space Station. So since that is our only destination over the next 10 years,
Again,
that schedule is already laid out, relatively firm,
through the authorization bill or for?
long before the authorization bill was even thought of.
Okay. And you said something about global climate change, and I just wanted to ask you, I know that you referenced global change. That is not climate change?
Change in the climate is it could be global warming, it could be global freezing,
What
it
is
could be
global
anything.
change in your eyes then? Because
Change
you
is what we're
referenced it.
experiencing today. When you go out in the middle of the summer and it's blistering hot, and you come in the middle of the winter and it's the coldest winter you've ever felt, that's climate change.
But you have global change in your testimony, and so I'm trying to determine, is that
Global climate
change or climate change?
The testimony probably says global climate change, which
It
says
says global change, that's why.
I'll go back and check. Yeah.
Thank you.
We missed a word.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I now recognize Mrs. Fudge, the gentlelady from Ohio, for 5 minutes.
Chairman. Good to see you again, Mr. Bolden.
Always good.
Administrator Bolden, as you know, I have many NASA Glenn employees in my district, as well as we have the NASA Glenn Visitor Center. I am glad to see that the President's budget request includes a diverse portfolio of initiatives for Glenn that utilize the center's strength and core capabilities. However, I'm concerned about anticipated shortfalls in the center management and operation funding at NASA Glenn. A continuation of FY10 level funding as described under the current CR represents an $8 million reduction in what is being proposed for FY12. Now, I have been to NASA Glenn, and the one thing that I'm certain of is that this is a group of extremely hardworking and brilliant scientists who know how to achieve extraordinary things on a tight budget. But I'm very concerned about the effects that cuts to the center management and operations will have on the contractor workforce and the facilities maintenance at Glenn. Could you please just discuss with me how you see these cuts impacting NASA Glenn if government continues operating under the CR, and will it have similar effects on other centers?
Congresswoman, if I understood correctly, if you're talking about the amendment to the CR that took the
Yes.
cross-agency support out, I don't want to speculate on what would happen to any single center. And I'm going to violate my rule, and I'm not going to speculate. I'm going to tell you what that amount of money equals.
Okay.
That amount of money equals a couple of NASA centers. So if, in fact, the Congress were to pass, that CR, I would have to find a way to either stretch money around or we're talking about the funds to run 2 NASA centers.
Correct.
But that is not what I expect to happen. Mm-hmm. As I said earlier, I expect that reasonable people can disagree and come to an ultimate agreement that is best for the nation. And so we continue to expect that we will be operating on at a 2010 level through the end of fiscal year 2011, and then that we will work to reach an agreement on a 2012 budget that follows along the lines of the budget that was proposed by the President and I introduced 2 weeks ago. That will fund NASA and allow us to do the things that you want us to do.
So that there is, in fact, still a commitment to make sure that when we have discussions about the FY12 budget, that we were still talking about the same level that was proposed in the President's budget as we go forward.
Congresswoman, that is correct, if I understand the question correctly. And when we look specifically at Glenn, Glenn will do well under the proposed fiscal year 12 budget, and I think you've had this conversation with Ray Lugo, and Ray is very conservative. Ray does not like to go out and brag about things for fear that someone will take them away. Ray understands, as do most of our center directors, that the money to the community does not come with a program office designation. The money to the community comes with projects and task orders through that program. So the fact that a center I don't have enough programs to make sure that every center has a program office, but it really doesn't matter to the people of the center. It may matter to people who are looking for titles, but to the workers in that community, it is really important that they get projects and task orders, and Glenn will do well.
Well, certainly, obviously, I am pleased with the 2012 budget. I think that Glenn has done well as it relates to that budget. But if you look at FY10, you're looking at $196 million to Glenn. In FY12, you're looking at $204 million. So for the year of 11, the effect of trying to move forward with projects, knowing what's happening in 11, that we're going to remain at this FY10 budget is a problem. It's a question. Let me not say it's a problem. Let me say that we need to understand better how we function at this FY10 level, knowing that there is much expected as we go into the FY12.
Yes, ma'am. I agree.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Now, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Ridgell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Bolton, thank you so much for being here and providing your testimony. I certainly respect your military service and your bravery as a test pilot, and now your service with NASA. I think it's a distinguished career. In your opening statement, you mentioned that there was, I think you characterized it as some concern about NASA's commitment to manned spaceflight or human spaceflight, and I'd say that doesn't capture my view. I am deeply troubled and really disturbed by it. I think the figure that you referenced, you said, look, we're allocating 44% of our budget to human spaceflight. Well, I come to the exact opposite conclusion. That doesn't reinforce the idea that we're committed to human spaceflight. That number, in my view, indicates that we're not as committed as we were, and nor are we as committed as we should be to human spaceflight. I see human spaceflight really as the essential DNA of NASA, and I would like for us to get back on a path of really investing in human spaceflight as quickly as we can. I think, as you said, reasonable people can disagree over these matters, but I'm here today to petition you and to move back in the direction of allocating more toward human spaceflight. We can talk about the proper allocation between commercial and actual NASA flights, but I still think we need to move in the other direction. You mentioned also, in response to a question offered today, that the savings of commercial spaceflight versus NASA, human spaceflight, I believe, and your response was, I believe, was, I don't know, and it seems to me that that's an essential question that is really fundamental to some of the things that we're going to have to deal with here on the committee. Would you please just expound on that answer a bit?
I'm glad you asked the question because it gives me an opportunity to elaborate. When we talk about connecting all the aspects of NASA, the NASA portfolio, we cannot separate human spaceflight from science. Our science missions may in the future utilize the same launch vehicle that we use to launch astronauts into space. Today, my science budget is under attack because of the rising cost of a launch vehicle. If I can find a way to get a cheaper launch vehicle, I can fly more science. That same launch vehicle that would take humans to low Earth orbit. So the integrated advantage of going to commercial carriers, to adding competition to the mix, whereas today, I mean, if you look at orbital sciences, Orbital designed the Taurus II not to take humans to orbit. They designed it to meet a market that they saw being there, which was for a medium lift rocket. They say that's where the science market is. That's the way that they targeted that. I happen to, we have done a little bit of conversation and some analysis of the market. So they are very comfortable that whether they participate in human spaceflight or not, they have hit the target because that's where the market lies. If they can win in being one of the carriers for humans to low Earth orbit, they have multiply magnified, their profit. They have decreased the cost to orbit for me because now all I do is buy service. I don't operate it. I don't carry the infrastructure cost. And there is some debate now about how much I am really spending on the Kennedy Space Center. There's disagreement even among my own people. We spend a lot of money every day every month, every year, just maintaining the infrastructure of the Kennedy Space Center, whether I fly a shuttle or not.
Well,
I am trying to get rid of that.
Well, on this point, I think we're in full agreement. I think that there is a place for a commercial role here, and I think that having, as a businessman who's now a representative in our Congress, I'm instinctively drawn to the statement, about competition and having companies compete here. But the question specifically is, and I think one that I'd ask that you maybe circle back around and provide some more information for the committee, and for me in particular, is the ability to properly develop an answer to that legitimate question of what are the relative cost of NASA putting a human in flight versus the private sector, and I think that merits more exploration.
So I will get you that. I will get you that answer, and the word you just used, that requires more exploration. The reason I can't give you the answer is because exploration is just that. It is something that we pursue, having no idea what we're going to find. If I looked at putting a dollar value on the A train, it's 5 Earth science satellites that orbit Earth, near polar orbit, every day. What's the dollar value on having the A train there to the people in Haiti, who many of whom were saved because one of the satellites revealed 3 areas of the country that were subject to landslides with the big earthquake that we would have never found for weeks? What's the value on the people of the Gulf Coast for what came out of the A train to help us understand the Gulf oil spill? I can't put a dollar value on that. So, I appreciate your question, and we'll try to get you an answer.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Recognize gentlelady from Alabama, Mrs. Sewell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bolden.
Thank you.
NASA's proposed budget indicates that there will be $138 million for education initiatives, including the space grant and minority university research programs. These are valuable partnerships that exist in the state of Alabama, where I'm from, for institutions such as UAH and Alabama A&M and UAB and University of Alabama. This is a 5.1% decrease from the nearly $146 million for FY 2011. How will this anticipated decrease in funding impact these valuable educational initiatives? I, like you, am quite concerned about educating the next generation and would like to see those partnerships continue.
Congresswoman, like every other agency in the government and like every company in America, we're looking for ways to streamline the way we do business. Leland Melvin, who is my new Associate Administrator for Education, once chaired, and now since he's the Associate Administrator, he oversees the work of an education design team within NASA. And we've gone out and we're working with professional educators, colleges and universities, secondary educators, to determine how we can better implement our education program within NASA so that we get the same value that we get right now for less money. So the $138 million is a significant amount of money for our education efforts. We are also trying to collaborate much more with other agencies. We're working with the First Lady's, the White House initiative for things such as helping military families. An aspect of that is education for military families. We have content that we can offer that we don't spend another dime on. It's already there. Whether it's talking to astronauts from the International Space Station. One of the best things I did when I was flying was we used to do something called SARX, where you got on a ham radio and you talk to kids in schools. That's incredible, and that comes at almost no cost. So we're trying to find better ways that we can implement what we have at lower cost.
Great. The proposed budget for FY12 also provides $1.8 billion to help develop a heavy lift vehicle, the SLS, that will launch the crew. Marshall Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama, will likely be a very major contributor in designing that heavy lift vehicle. And in FY12, the funding request for this project significantly, is it sufficient, I would say, to fully fund and sustain the development of the heavy lift vehicle through 2016, which is the desired timetable. And are you committed to making sure that those funding levels stay about the same?
I'm committed to try to make sure that the funding levels remain about the same. And one of the things that you will see in our congressional justifications is, beginning in 2013, I have asked, and I think I've been granted, it remains to be seen whether the Congress will agree, that we put human exploration in one budget line, so that as we go with the development of an evolvable heavy lift system and a multi-purpose crew vehicle, that we can move the funds around as necessary in each successive year so that we marry those programs up when we need them. You know, that being the 2020 time frame is when we will need an integrated heavy lift launch vehicle and crew exploration vehicle that can go beyond low Earth orbit. There may be available systems before that time, but I don't need one for beyond low Earth orbit until 2020.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you. Chair now recognizes the Chairman of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, Mr. Palazzo, the gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bolden, for being here. And like my colleague, Mr. Ridgel, thank you for your 34 years of service to the Marine Corps. Yeah, after seeing that you've been in Vietnam and had over 100 missions, I doubt there's much that I can say or do to rattle you. So
just don't shoot me.
Or shoot at you, right? Absolutely. I do have some questions for you. And one is, you have often made the argument that access to low Earth orbit is well understood enough that we can turn this over to commercial providers. How can you be confident that the commercial crews and cargo is sufficiently mature enough to justify a firm fixed contract? And if so, can you explain some of the significant delays in time and cost that are in the COTS and the CRS program today?
I am certain that the commercial entities can deliver, because in the past, if you look at the two that I'm working with right now, at least one of them has been doing it for more than 20 years. Orbital has been delivering cargo and other things, well, not cargo, but been delivering satellites to orbit since their inception. And if I look at just one of the rockets that they prepare for us, Minotaur, which is a government rocket that we procure in surplus, and then it's given to Orbital to prepare. They have a 100% success rate with Minotaur launches, so I'm not concerned about their ability to deliver. In terms of why have we had setbacks, we're now trying to take, in some cases, existing systems or emerging systems and certify them for human spaceflight. So the companies are trying to get as much information, data as they can while they're doing the COTS and CRS programs that can be transferred into a commercial crew program, so that it cuts down on the amount of time that they have to invest in development of techniques and procedures and the like for them. And like in a development program, they experience setbacks. I give the example of, and I'll make it really quick. Okay. If I had a failure or a problem like Orbital had last December before they launched Taurus, before they launched the Dragon capsule on Falcon 9, where they had a crack in an engine bell, I would still be sitting on the ground. We would not have launched. It took me 4 months to get Discovery off the ground successfully on STS-133 after we found a small crack in foam which revealed a structural problem that we had in the external tank. Commercial entities do what we do, they just don't have the bureaucracy that we have. So we will learn from them, and we will be able to speed up the time, decrease the amount of time we have when we do experience a delay.
You know, we're going to be watching closely, so it'd be nice to see if they can actually come in under budget, or, you know, and not on time and within cost.
Yes, sir.
Now, NASA has not always been forthcoming with details of its acquisition strategy for commercial cargo, and has not shared their strategy for commercial crew. But the key to both has been to open with a Space Act agreement, devoid of any meaningful checks and balances, followed by an overlapping fixed-price contract to the same contractors. It's hard to see how there can be a true, full, and open competition for the fixed-price contracts under those circumstances when SpaceX selectees are already under contract. Why is NASA proceeding in this manner, and why avoid using a traditional FAR acquisition process?
Congressman, we have not decided on the acquisition strategy yet. I've not approved it, so it's not that we're not being forthcoming I am pushing my people now to get to the point where we develop an acquisition strategy for commercial crew. So the holdup is us. It's not the commercial entities. They are asking for our acquisition strategy. We have given them what we call human rating standards. We gave it to them in the draft form. They utilize that. We now have now we have published our human rating standards. So we're making as much as we can available to the commercial entities as quickly as we can.
Now, as you know, Stennis Space Center is in my district. And as NASA moves forward with plans for both NASA and commercial activities, I want to know if there will be any impact on Stennis and their leadership in rocket propulsion tests. And will Stennis remain the leader for NASA and commercial rocket propulsion?
We made an announcement yesterday that Marshall Space Flight Center will be the home of the program office for the SLS, the Space Launch System. A sister center of used to be a part of Marshall and is now its own entity, is the Stennis Space Flight Center. Stennis is the nation's center for propulsion test. It is where people go, and we're trying to encourage the commercial entities to come and fully utilize the facilities at Stennis, to a much greater extent than they do right now. And we're starting to get overtures from some of the commercial entities that say, we really would like to come down and look at your facilities and perhaps use that. Ideally, everyone will come to Stennis to test engines. When I was there, and you had been there the day before at Stennis, I went down for the test firing of the second AJ-26 engine produced by Aerojet for orbital. It was incredible. I mean, the morale of the people there was absolutely incredible. And they now have completed the test on 2 engines for a commercial entity that will now put those 2 rockets on the Taurus II that eventually will be Orbital's entry into COTS.
Okay, and I have one last brief question. Many NASA facilities are going to require upgrades to continue providing their mission for NASA's future work. Are you committed to providing the necessary resources to upgrade the test facilities at Stennis? I'm
committed to do that. And I think we've talked to you about the A3 test stand, and my commitment to complete the work on the A3 test stand is an example.
Thank you, Mr. Bolden.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bolden, thanks for coming and testifying this morning. It's certainly an issue that I think everybody's interested in this country. Space exploration, space flight, and so on. I had the opportunity to visit the SpaceX reception here in D.C. a couple weeks ago. Apparently they sent up a vehicle that launched, orbited, and re-entered successfully. What's your assessment of that mission? Was it very successful?
Awesome.
Awesome.
In one word. You have to understand what the significance of that was. 3 nations up until now, only 3 nations up until now, and there are many who want to be able to do this. India is one. The 3 nations are China, Russia, and the United States that have successfully launched something from the planet, put it into orbit, and then safely deorbited it and recovered it intact. The 4th entity to do that became SpaceX in December when they launched Falcon 9 and Dragon. And what you saw in the lot, I did not go, but I understand what you saw was the Dragon capsule that had been pulled out of the Pacific Ocean, and you could tell for yourself what condition it was in. Their intent is for it to be a reusable capsule. That's why it was awesome.
So I know these questions, some of these questions have been asked before, so I'm just going to sort of run over them. You expect this sort of mission to be more cost-effective than NASA could do it for reasons that you mentioned. How about compared to Russia or some of the other countries that we've heard NASA may use once the space shuttle stops operating?
We will continue to use the Soyuz spacecraft to get our astronauts to and from the International Space Station, as we have done since the Columbia accident. My hope is that as soon as possible, we will finally have American-made rockets by American-made companies that will be available to take our astronauts back and forth. Do it safely and efficiently. And so that's why I made the tough decision to take some of the funding away from heavy lift and MPCV and put it toward commercial development, because I have to have a way to get my crews safely to the International Space Station as soon as possible. I don't think anybody on this committee wants to have to rely. The Russians are an incredible partner. They have been with us through thick and thin. They rescued us after the Columbia accident, and until we were flying shuttle again, they took our crews back and forth to space, and they continue to do that. I don't want to have to do that forever. I want to have American-made rockets and American-made capsules that take our crews to low Earth orbit. And I have been ineffective in explaining the critical value of making that possible as soon as possible. I don't have enough money to give them to bring it in. You know, I'm trying to buy down the risk on that. Every dime I can put toward that effort buys down the risk.
You know, I was in industry before I came here, and I understand the importance of having multiple suppliers, because if you just have one, they're going to you're at their mercy. What's the prospects for having multiple private companies in this country capable of carrying out these missions, these transportation missions?
I will give you my guess, and that is only a guess, and with all due respect to everybody on this committee. I don't run a company. I have never run a company. But I talk to people who run companies, and they have boards that they have to convince that it is worth the investment. And so I think some of my industry partners are still back here. They will tell you they have had to fight to convince their boards that what we are about to do is worth the risk. It is a big risk for these companies. And they have convinced their boards that they need to put assets against it. And I'm going with them. I think they can do this.
Are there foreign companies doing the same thing?
Oh, there are foreign companies that are teaming with American companies in everything we do. It is hard to find any industrial effort today where people are not teaming with international partners. The President's, our own space policy emphasizes the importance of teaming with international partners. The Hubble Space Telescope, which I helped deploy in 1990, would have never been possible without the cooperation of the European Space Agency as a partner. The solar arrays came from the British space, you know, the British aerospace.
The last question I have then is, are there going to be any restrictions on these companies in terms of carrying out commercial missions that may have some harm to our national security?
There are always restrictions, and that's where you have to help me. You have probably, I'm not sure which committees you're on, but the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the President, all of us are pleading for help from the Congress in streamlining the export-import laws so that we don't continue to penalize American industry. You hurt NASA because I have to rely on my industry partners. When they are held to very strict standards under INCSNA and you name it, they could give you a whole list of import-export laws. There is a happy medium somewhere, and we're not there right now. We have driven business offshore, and we've got to get it back.
Right.
Just having commercial launch services available is not going to bring the business back. We have got to make some changes in our export-import laws.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And the chair recognizes now the chairman of Research and Science Education Subcommittee, Mr. Brooks, gentleman from Alabama, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bolden. Mr. Bolden, were you aware that a couple of weeks ago when the House was debating a continuing resolution for this fiscal year that there was an amendment proposed to cut roughly $300 million from the NASA budget and divert that to the COPS program?
Oh, yes, sir. I am very much aware of that. We talked about it quite a bit.
And what harm would be done to NASA, if any, by the diversion of this $300 million if it's left to stand in the Senate?
Congressman, you know, if we talk just about that amendment to the provision and nothing else, I might be able to give you an answer, but because I don't know what is going to be the final result of a CR, it would be conjecture for me to guess. There may be some offsetting adjustments made in the final CR that puts all that money back. So I don't want to run the risk of guessing on something that is not there yet.
Well, as it stands right now, would the loss of that $300 million adversely affect NASA's capabilities?
I think I answered a little bit earlier. That amount of money, I think what you're asking is that amount of money is a couple of NASA centers, maybe, you know, in terms of day-to-day operations.
Well, that sounds, I mean, I'm a freshman, but that sounds pretty significant to me. Would you agree that that's a significant adverse effect?
That would be a significant adverse effect. But again, I'm not going to speculate because that is a decision that has not been made by the Congress yet. The House has passed and the Senate will still have a say. So you're asking me to guess on something that the other house of this Congress is going to.
Well, no, I'm
still
not
has
asking
to-
you to guess about what the Senate may or may not do. I'm asking you to testify whether there is an adverse effect from what the House's position has been, and that's the loss of $300 million to NASA. Do you have a position?
Sir, there is always, you know, an adverse impact about any decrease in funding. If I look at the effect on contractors, I am told that that's about 4,000 contractor jobs. So that's an adverse impact.
Given that kind of adverse impact on NASA, what effort did either NASA or the White House undertake to communicate that adverse impact to congressmen before they voted in order to help protect the NASA budget?
I don't know what effort the White House made, and I just know that whenever we came to the Hill and we were asked about it, we generally said it would have an adverse impact, but we tried not to second guess what the Congress was going to do, as we always try to do.
Well, I'm not aware of any effort by NASA or the White House to communicate any kind of adverse impact to the members of the House of Representatives from the diversion of $300 million from NASA to a local police and deputy program. Are you aware of any effort by the White House or NASA to communicate that to House members before the vote?
Congressman Brooks, I'm not personally aware, but let me take it for the record, and I will get back to you on any actions that our folk took, because we've been up here over the last several weeks or months, and I will find out for you.
Well, I'm pleased to report that 70% of the Republicans in the House try to protect the NASA budget. Unfortunately, 83% of the Democrats tried to undermine the NASA budget by diverting the programs to a local police officer program, which I would submit is not an essential function of the federal government, while certainly NASA is a function of the federal government. So I'd appreciate anything you can do in the future to try to help communicate to House members or senators, as the case may be, when these kinds of amendments come up that can have that kind of adverse impact on NASA, on 4,000 contractors in their jobs, or two NASA centers that you just brought up. Moving on to a different matter, going back to April 15th, 2010, the President made public remarks at the Kennedy Space Flight Center that suggested the moon was no longer a destination for future manned missions when he said, quote, "The simple fact is we have been there before. There is a lot more space to explore," end quote. However, in looking at your comments today, I'm thankful that on page 2 of your official statement, you mentioned that the moon is a target. Is that correct?
Sir, the moon is a continuing target for NASA. We have ongoing missions to the moon all the time. So it remains, lunar exploration remains in our portfolio.
What is the targeted date for landing on the moon?
Oh, a human landing on the moon? We don't have a target date for a human landing on the moon because at present, that is not one of the missions that I think is essential for us to be able to do deep exploration.
So if I'm clear on this, we're planning on sending scientific instruments, but as of now, NASA has no plans to have any human space activity on the moon.
I have no plans that I have brought forth to the Congress or anyone. That does not say what is going on inside the agency does not include human lunar missions. We're developing a lunar rover right now that would completely do away with any need for habitats on the surface of the moon. So we are always looking at where we can go in the future. That's a part of being prepared to do exploration.
Well, my time has expired. Thank you for your assistance.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, if you're short of people that you want to send to the moon, I got several in my district that I'd like to volunteer for you. All right, next we will have a gentlelady, one of my very favorites from California, Ms. Woolsey.
Thank you.
3 minutes, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, I had the privilege of attending a conference on the subject of energy security, and it was attended with, it was bipartisan, bicameral, and it was clear in our discussions with scientists and experts that the decision makers in our country, which is all of us and others, have to come to terms with climate change. You call it global warming, climate change. And So I want to go on record and have always been one that is willing to talk climate change and know that we have to start addressing it and doing something about it. And I appreciate that NASA's view of the Earth is going to be very helpful in that regard. And that leads me directly to what I want to talk about, and that's about being educated and having the right support in order to be able to do what you need to do as an agency. The President Obama has set a goal of recruiting 10,000 teachers in STEM fields, in the STEM fields. He calls these subjects essential to competing in the 21st global economy. Yet, his proposal for his budget drastically cuts funding for NASA's education programs, including the STEM education programs. So I ask you, how are we supposed to increase participation in STEM if we're cutting the very programs that foster interest in STEM in the first place? And how is your agency adjusting to this? You need those smart people.
Congresswoman, the difference between what you see in the 2012 budget and what you saw in previous budgets is actually the result of action on the part of, thankfully, on the part of the Congress. The proposed amount of funding for education from this administration has been consistent, and it usually is at about the $140 million level each year, give or take. And that has been consistent, but what happens, thankfully, is that the Congress usually adds money back onto that. So when you look at, if you say that that we have cut spending on education, we didn't cut it. We didn't add back in what the Congress chose to put on in previous years, if that's not too confusing.
Well, it's not confusing because we worked very, very hard to get that additional funding for STEM. And Chairman Gordon was a leader in it, and he worked with Chairman Hall when they were in reverse positions and really made something positive happen for NASA and for STEM programs.
Yes, ma'am. And Congresswoman, as I mentioned before, our focus is on STEM education. The Summer of Innovation targets middle school children and, most importantly, their teachers, because we want to make middle school teachers very comfortable with teaching math, science. We want them not to run away from it. That pilot program last year, we understand, was very successful. If we can reach 1,000 teachers, multiply that times the number of students in a classroom. So that's our big focus. The design team that we put in place is trying to, as I mentioned to Congresswoman Sewell, I think I can do a better job with $138 million than we have done in the past, because we're going to take the recommendations from the design team and we're going to redo the way that we do education in NASA. People will have to trust us, though, because if everybody makes me go back to doing education the way I've always done education, it's $138 million and we'll get the same. You know, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and assuming something's going to be different. If somebody makes me spend my $138 million exactly the same way year after year, I can't have any effect.
Well, one of the recommendations I would have is in reevaluating your programs that you put an extra effort into women and minorities joining the STEM fields.
That is a point of emphasis for us. We are active on the President's Council on Women, you know, in everywhere. I have 3 granddaughters and a daughter. I have a son, too, but I try to take care of the women in my life, and so education of women and minorities is pretty important since I happen to be one.
Well, and therefore, they can take care of themselves if they.
I want them to take care of me years from now.
That's right, I got it.
They need to be very well educated, and they need to be astronauts and doctors and engineers.
There, thank you very much.
I thank the lady. Now I recognize Congressman Hultgren from Illinois, and got a chance to know Randy very well. He accompanied the Codell to watch the Discovery launch, last week? And thanks for that. Recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hall. Administrator, thank you so much, hiding over in the corner over here. But wanted just to say we really appreciate you being here. It really was a privilege to be down for the launch with Chairman Hall and other members of the committee last week, and to steal or borrow one of your words, it was awesome. So it was great, and it really was helpful for us. Everybody there was so informative and really helping us understand the mission, and it was so exciting to be a part of that. So thank you for your work. I want to shift gears just quickly. Oftentimes we wear different hats here, and want to get your perspective on something. I also serve on the Transportation Committee, Aviation Subcommittee. One of the areas that we've worked on and talked about pretty significantly is NextGen, looking at its next generation air transportation system. And I know NASA has had a significant part, along with other departments as well. And I just wanted briefly to get your thoughts on NextGen, some of the work there as a key partner along with the FAA, Defense Department, other federal agencies. What does NASA see as some of the biggest challenges confronting NextGen? And from your perspective, how do you feel like this multi-agency collaboration is going? What can we do to improve that, to make sure that lower space travel is going well?
Congressman, NextGen is incredibly important to this nation, and I am thankful that you asked the question, and I will try not to take all your time, but I could talk forever about this. NASA is heavily involved in NextGen. If you look at what we have done in terms of aircraft safety, with the next generation transportation system development, if you look at the constant descent and arrival profiles that are being worked on through with the FAA and DoD, we actually, through Langley Research Center and Ames Research Center, have designed some of the software and the programs that now have allowed us to go through some actual demonstrations of constant descent, constant climb outs. United Airlines and Continental were participants in tests that we did at Denver over the last few years. Those have all proved that we're talking about hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel saved. You know, my aeronautics budget is $588 million or something like that. It is. Somebody asked about, you know, giving them a cost benefit. If I look at the amount of money that the airlines will save just through some of the work that came from NextGen, new airplanes and engine designs that we've participated in, the estimate is it will pay for my 1% of the savings to the airlines will pay for my aeronautics budget. If I could find a way, you know, if you all could devise some system such that industry put money back into us when we help them realize savings, then all of our jobs would be a lot easier. But 1% of the projected savings from some of the work that NASA has done in NextGen would fund my aeronautics budget.
Well, I want to thank you for that, and I agree with you, and I think that is part of our job, is to get that message out there and to see that, although it was great to be down there last week, that there's so much more that NASA is doing that we all appreciate and see the benefit from. Many of us are frequent air travelers coming back and forth to Washington, D.C. My district is just west of Chicago, so I think I've got the highest number of folks who are helping to make sure that our skies are safe, who help with air traffic control with O'Hare, one of the busiest airports in the world. So I do appreciate your work there, and I think we have to keep telling that message of the work of NASA and collaboration that's happening, the savings that we see, and the better environment that we have, the cost savings that are there. And the thing I'm most excited about is the safety, where it's been over 2 years now since we've had a fatality with commercial airlines, and so we need to continue that record. And I just, again, want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, and hopefully we can tell that story of how collaboration does make our lives better and save so much money into the future. So thank you so much.
So I thank you for the question, and I would just ask if you'd keep asking Aero questions. I don't get very many of them, and I really like to tell our Aero story, but we get caught up in human spaceflight. If we can do what you say, aeronautics covers everything right up to the edge of the atmosphere. It's the way we get into space, and it's the way we come back. Hypersonic aeronautics is entry. It is what SpaceX learned how to do to bring the Dragon capsule back. So that's aeronautics. Everybody's got to come back to Earth sometime. Thank you.
Fine, that's exactly 5 minutes. Well done. And to the very patient Mr. Sarbanes from Maryland, recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today and for your testimony. I'm a new member to the committee, and it seems it's common practice to let NASA know if you have a facility in your district. So I'll present my credentials by saying that I have the Applied Physics Lab in my district in Howard County, and they do tremendous work, particularly with respect to deep space exploration, which I know is one of the areas that's funded by NASA, so I hope to learn more about that particular relationship. I'm also new to the this discussion on commercial space flight. It's a pretty fascinating one, I understand, with broad implications and with a lot of different perspectives in the mix. I had this past weekend the opportunity to spend a fair amount of time with Peter Diamandis, who founded the X Prize, of course.
Yeah.
And he really gets you going with his vision of things, and he's obviously been very involved in this. I was hoping you could, and again, I apologize because I'm getting, you know, this is a curve for me, but with respect to the commercial space flight and the costs associated with it, is there a way you could just describe kind of the baskets that those costs go into? So in other words, I understand that there's a cost associated with making certain NASA facilities available for, you know, I guess co-development of the technologies that will help promote commercial space flight. I gather that once those crews are in place, that NASA will have costs associated with renting space or seats on those flights, and there must be other dimensions of being a partner in the development of the commercial space flight program that represent part of the expenditures that you lay out. So I was wondering if you could just talk about the broad baskets that those costs go into, and then the extent to which some of those represent kind of transitional costs, in effect launching the commercial spaceflight program, as opposed to ongoing costs that NASA will incur with respect to commercial spaceflight, you know, over time.
If I go back to the very beginning of our efforts, the COTS program, the Commercial Orbital Transportation System, which is just getting cargo to orbit, that was a Space Act agreement with a defined amount of money. So like a fixed price contract for all intents and purposes, NASA paid a certain amount as milestones, NASA pays a certain amount as milestones are met by the two participants. The two companies that won were SpaceX and Orbital. And so through the completion of the COTS, we will pay them a predetermined amount of money for each milestone they meet. When we move into the CRS, which is cargo resupply portion, that is where we get into a contractual arrangement, and we have made contractual arrangements with those two companies since, again, they were the winners. So they get paid, again, as they meet certain milestones, but once they start delivering cargo for a set price, you know, we will buy the ride to the International Space Station or wherever else we take it. When you get into commercial crew, that is the area that has some vagueness right now, because those prices are not yet determined. There are things that need to be determined. I have to present to industry a procurement strategy. You know, that is what we talked about a little bit earlier, and that's what an acquisition strategy. That's what we have not fully developed yet. Once we have a fully developed acquisition strategy, we can sit down with the competitors and say, okay, here's what we're going to do. These are the types of contracts we're going to use, whether it's Space Act agreements, fixed price contracts, cost plus, you name it. And here are some of the requirements that you're going to have to meet. We can then sit down and say, okay, what is NASA's percentage of investment in this enterprise? Okay. That once we decide what that is, then I will have essentially a fixed price, a cost that I will know.
Let me ask you another question. My time's about to expire, and I don't want to go beyond the allotted time if I can help it. There's a lot of focus on NASA helping to support and develop commercialization with respect to human spaceflight, but what are some other areas of what NASA does, where you see this kind of commercial partnering effort going on that maybe don't get discussed so much?
The ones that don't get discussed are the ones we do all the time. And just before you came in, we were talking with a representative from Detroit. Robonaut 2, R2 is a humanoid robot that is now on the International Space Station, was taken there by Discovery last week, STS-133. R2 is the result of a collaboration in a Space Act agreement between General Motors in Detroit, and I'll get in trouble because they'll say, well, it was General Motors in Chicago or somewhere, but General Motors and the automobile manufacturing arm of General Motors and NASA, where General Motors needed a robot that could relieve some of the problems they were having with injuries to workers. NASA needed a robot to help offset some of the risk to spacewalk crew members, things that a robot could do that we wouldn't even have to send an astronaut outside to do. That is one example. There are a number of examples like that where we have done it on a shoestring because it's technology development. We turn a few guys loose in a laboratory somewhere around the country, and they go off and pick an industrial partner and develop something that comes into play. How many of them are successful? I couldn't tell you. Most of them don't work, but that's the good part about it. Scientists and engineers love it because they bring college kids in. We have something now called small sats or microsats. Colleges and universities around the country, even secondary school kids now are getting involved in small sats or microsats. It's something that that NASA and DoD developed, and now we utilize to try to reach kids and help them understand that they too can participate in space exploration from their classroom. So these are all good things.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Well, I have no more time, so thank you.
Thank you. You're right on the dot. This time recognizes a very, very, very patient Mr. McCall, the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have been sitting here patiently, and I assure you next time I will arrive before the gavel comes down.
You know, when I was the first up here 30 years ago, I was the second one here always. I didn't want to wait till the end to talk.
That's right. Well, I guess I'll close out the proceedings, possibly. Plan to attend the April shuttle launch, and I think that's going to be a historic mission. I know Gabby's husband, Mark, will be leading that effort. And now, you mentioned her in your testimony very affectionately. I think we all look forward to the day that she will be serving back on this committee. And there is no greater champion for the human spaceflight program, I think, than Gabby. And I remember working with her on the reauthorization. She was obviously opposed to the president's decision to cancel the Constellation program. One of the last conversations I had with her, in fact, the last one, was we were walking onto the House floor just a day or two before the tragic event, and she talked about NASA. She was just such a staunch advocate for the human spaceflight program, and so, as am I. And I represent a district that was once held by Lyndon Johnson. And on the Houston end of my district in the suburbs, I represent many Johnson Space Center employees and contractors. I know in our reauthorization, we restored a lot of funding for human spaceflight in spite of this administration's attempt to kill that. And I guess as you present this budget, and as I go back home to my district, they will want to know what is their future. And so I guess what I'm asking you is, what am I to tell them when they ask me about contracts related to human spaceflight, about the future of human spaceflight program? And I know these are some of your dearest friends. But what am I to tell my constituents who are part of the Johnson Space Center?
Congressman, you should tell them that the future of human spaceflight is bright and robust, and that we need their help in rapidly developing new systems so that we can go explore. This nation has not ventured beyond the moon with humans. We've been saying we were going to do it forever. I get chastised when I talk about wanting to go to Mars. I want to go to Mars. When I came into the astronaut office in 1980, I thought I would fly on the shuttle a couple of times, and then I would be among those that would be returning to the moon. And then Challenger happened. And my dream of ever going to another planet went away. I don't want that for my grandkids. So I need their help. We have got to develop commercial capability to get to low Earth orbit so that we can continue to support the International Space Station. That's our moon right now. That's where we do technology development. That's where we do medical research. That's where we do things to make life better on Earth. We don't, contrary to what people think, NASA doesn't do stuff just for astronauts. Most of what we do is return to Earth in terms of benefits for humankind. And I can go down you all can do it yourselves. You can look at an EMT ambulance that has the developments that were put in place for the Apollo program, wireless communications. Congresswoman Johnson listed a whole bunch of them in her opening remarks. The nation needs to become unafraid of exploration. We need to become unafraid of taking risks. Is it a risk to go with commercial entities? For me, no more risk than anything else, because I've always, every rocket I've flown on, I've only flown on 4 times, but 3 was built by a commercial entity. You know, it was Rockwell when it started, and when I finished, I think it was Boeing, maintained by USA, United Space Alliances.
If I could just ask one last, because my time's running out, and I appreciate your passion. I know you're very passionate about returning to the moon, and I would hope that I could work with you in terms of restoring the morale of some of the employees at the Johnson Space Center and assure them that there is a bright future ahead. And I think we in the Congress have a responsibility to make sure you have the resources to do this. You mentioned in your testimony, if I'm correct, that it would be 2030 before we could get back to the moon. It's been 42 years since we landed on the moon. President Kennedy set the goal of by the end of the decade, less than 10 years, we were on the moon in 1969. I think a lot of people wonder why now it will take almost 20 years to get back to the moon. Most Americans, they don't understand when we landed there, so long ago, why has it taken so long to get back? Because like you, I agree with and you're very passionate about it, with the goal that eventually we are going to have to go back to the moon and beyond. So perhaps if you could explain that to me and the American people.
Congressman, I need to correct one thing. It would not take us until 2030 to go to the moon. If we decided that we wanted to go to the moon and put humans there, that potentially could be done by the end of this present decade. But that is not one of the targets that has been produced either by the Congress or the President. Mm-hmm. What has been set forth as targets are 2025 to an asteroid, and then the 2030s to be able to get to Mars, with a follow-on landing. The reason we have not been there is because that's not been a goal of the nation, and we were content to stay in low Earth orbit, which is hard. But the nation has not. It has not been something that the nation thought was important.
Well, I know the prior administration, President Bush, did set that as a goal: the moon, Mars, and beyond. And so I think that was at one point in time the goal for NASA. And Mr. Chairman, I hope we can work together to perhaps restore that vision and that goal in the Congress, which I think is so vitally important. And I know, Administrator, you agree with. So with that, I yield back. Thank you.
I thank you, and the ranking member would have a final question from the chairman, please.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Bolden, thank you very much for your time here and your passion, your interest, and your ability. It's extraordinary that you are sitting there defending the president's budget. I think it's grossly inadequate, and I hope that we can help a little bit. I know that I heard the gentleman, I think from Mississippi, mention that we had no aviation deaths the last 2 years. I know that you know why. We've got those satellites that's predicting weather and making sure that even farmers know when a drought's coming and whether for food supply and what have you. What do you know the condition of those satellites?
Congresswoman, I will get back to you on specific satellites and their life expectancy. Most currently on orbit have outlived their planned lifetime. We tend to not remember that, our technology is such that we always build things that last a lot longer than we thought, when we ought to be thinking about obsolescence. And so we are behind as a nation in providing Earth science satellites, those that can supply weather and the like, not only for civilian use, but for the Department of Defense. You know, you talk about trafficability, about my son's a Marine, and you know, if he's on the ground, he needs to know what the soil is going to be like before he goes somewhere. That comes from satellites, and so we owe it to these young men and women who are doing things for us to provide them with satellite systems that are reliable, and we are behind.
Thank you. One final question. I know that NASA had something to do with helping to rescue those miners in Chile. Could you explain that?
I can explain that. I love it. It has nothing to do with NASA. No intent whatsoever. No one in NASA ever dreamed that we would be able to do what we did. But when we learned that the Chilean miners, the 33 who were trapped, were still alive, a number of our NASA employees from around the country, 3 doctors and 1 engineer, asked if they could go down to Chile and just ask around, see what needed to be done. And they started finding that, okay, we need to find ways to get food to these people. We need to determine what's needed to keep them alive for the months that we originally thought they were going to be down there. When we bring them back to the surface, how do we triage them? How do we get them back to normal? What we used was all the lessons we've learned from flying on Mir, the International Space Station, and all the way back to Skylab days. So we put to work the lessons that we had learned in exploration, things we never thought about. One of our engineers from the Langley Research Center, who was a Navy submariner, got together with a Chilean submariner who happened to be an engineer on the project, and the 2 of them led the team that designed the capsule that brought all 33 miners back to the surface, plus the additional 5 or 6 that went down, you know, to stabilize everybody. So that is one of the most phenomenal success stories, you know, that excited the president, because nobody ever dreamed we would do that. Same thing with the earthquake in Haiti, same thing with the Gulf oil spill. NASA is sort of the Marine Corps of the science and aeronautics community. We are the most ready when the nation is least ready.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that the life of NASA depends on the life of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. Those are things that should be better known to school children and everybody else that has some ill words for the work of NASA. Yeah. I thank you, Mr. Bolden, and I thank you for your very good testimony, and the members of the committee will have additional questions maybe for you, and ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will be kept open for 2 weeks for additional comments from members, as Mrs. Johnson, I think, has suggested that she has some comments she wants back. So you're excused, and I really do thank you. We appreciate you very much.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and we will try to get the responses back to you in a timely manner.
And just before I hit the gavel, I want to recognize a gentleman from New York, longtime chairman here, Chairman Bullard. And with that, we adjourn.